What's up, internets? This is Andrew with Lost Origins. Thank you guys so much for tuning in this week as we reboot the podcast. Super exciting. I know that we went dark for several years. We are going to explain that thoroughly in today's episode. We're also going to do some pretty awesome things as it relates to just the structure of the show. We're going to introduce our new co-host, CK, or Christopher Kingsley. We're going to talk about the new format of this season. We're going to chew on different topics and theories that we cannot wait to explore throughout the course of this season, and so much more. So make sure that you guys stay tuned for this week's episode of Lost Origins, Season 2, Episode 1, From the Ashes, Lost Origins Returns. Let's jump in. Holy hell. This is Andrew, and it's been quite some time, and I'm very aware of that. And before we jump into where we've been, why we've been dark, I got to throw some love to Inner Traditions and Bear & Company. These guys have just always had our back and have always gone out of their way to work with us, and they are once again the title sponsor of this season's show. So if you're not familiar with Inner Traditions and Bear & Company, you guys need to hop over to their site, innertraditions.com. Their catalog is so deep, and it is just filled with amazing reads, ancient mysteries, lost civilizations, and so much stuff in between too. I mean, stuff outside of the scope of this show. But I am just a resounding fan of what they're doing. The researchers and authors that they're working with and supporting. It's just an amazing thing that they've built. So we have nothing but just love for our friends at Inner Traditions. So make sure that you hop over there and pick up a copy of something good and get your read on. So let's clear the air and let's talk about where we've been. I was looking at the calendar, and it's been I think a little over 3 years since I published a thing. And that's not cool, right? I shouldn't do that to you guys, just leave you hanging. We went super hard and super heavy, and we had some hitters on the show, and, the love, support, questions, feedback, everything that we were getting from you guys was just really, really humbling and a little overwhelming in a good way. And then just radio silence. And so what ended up happening was I owned a company in Denver, Colorado, and was focusing on growing that thing, and ended up getting out of that company towards the tail end of 2015, sold that, and then moved here to Lincoln, Nebraska, which is where I currently reside, at the beginning of 2016. And so I ended up spinning up another company that had a very similar focus, that being web development, advertising, marketing, all the nerd stuff, and grew that like gangbusters. And so my daily delta was just straight up consumed by work. Was working a ridiculous amount of hours. And then I also have 3 humans, right? My daughter's 11. I've got 2 boys, 5 and 3. And so, I try to be, as present as I possibly can be and be a good dad and be involved. And so when I'm looking at, the way a day breaks down, you got 24 hours, you got to sleep a few of those. It ended up coming down to there weren't enough hours in the day to be able to do the thing. So I'd like to take this opportunity to issue a formal apology to the listeners of the show. We're not going to be going dark on you guys anytime soon. So that being said, this episode is going to be kind of a tee up for what we have in store for you this season. On social media, I've kind of been teasing that we are reimagining the show soup to nuts almost, and that we're trying to create new ways for you guys to engage with us, for us to make sure that we're creating content that you guys want to consume, but also just the format of the show in general, right? Historically, it's been me connecting with an author or researcher, via like a Skype call or whatever, and we talk through their work. And the show is 100% still going to be a platform where we bring people on and we're allowing them to explain their work in a way that's just more accessible, I suppose. So that's still going to remain the same. But one of the biggest twists of this season is we're bringing on a co-host. And this is a dude that, my God, one of the smartest human beings I've ever met in my life. He's sitting here looking right at me, and
Too kind.
I'm not trying to make it awkward, but no, this guy is just brilliant. His mind has always intrigued me. We've known each other for several years. We've developed an amazing friendship, but we've also worked together in several capacities. And then when we discovered that we both have a passion for this gnarly pocket of history and science and just all these things, we were on a whole nother level, right? And so the more we talked about it, the more we realized this is 100% the way we should be formatting the show, is the two of us working together to really pick the brains of these authors and researchers to just try to figure out where we come from, who we are, what does that mean for our future as a species, and what can we learn from the potential mistakes in the past to maybe help right the ship for the future. So this guy, without further ado, his name is Christopher Kingsley. And yeah, dude, it's cool to have you here on the show, and I'm excited to pick some brains with you, man. So
hell yeah, I appreciate it, and it's been so cool to see what you've built and what you made over the last season of the show. And I will say, just humbly, I learned a lot listening to it.
That's awesome.
I feel like while we obviously both vibe over so many different investigations into history and kind of origins in general, I feel like one of the things I'm most excited about this season is just learning.
Yeah.
Just being able to speak with some of these experts, speak with some of these researchers, really understand some theories that I've just started pulling threads at. And I think just the two of us have a lot of curiosity in similar areas, but also in distinct areas. So super psyched to be involved. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, this is going to be cool. So CK, you'll hear me call him that quite often, or Christopher. Just you don't call him Chris. That's the rule. Just like you don't call me Andy. And now our comments are going to be just
all
alive.
Hey, Chris and Andy, what do you guys think about that?
It's a Chris and Andy show. Man, I'm gonna write that song tonight. That'll be the new intro. So CK, just hit me with a little bit of just who are you? What got you really interested in this space, pulling at these threads, like you said. Just hit us with a little bit of your background, man.
Sure. Raised by a couple scientists, a surgeon father and a trauma nurse mother. Very reading-centric, investigation-centric household growing up. A couple sisters, equally nerdy. We spent a lot of time, I think, just trying to keep up with our parents' voracious reading and a lot of hunger for knowledge. And I think just bar none, just always having this sense that there's something more, there's something more beyond the immediacy of what you're taught about our limited sort of understanding as a race of where we came from. And I think more so than anything, just having this sense that there's always something around the corner, that there's always, the more you know that you do not know enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I think over the course of my own study of so many of these aspects of our origins and history in general, I've just been really, my own personal curiosity has just continued to be stoked insofar as I've never found the end of it,
Right.
And I think the exciting aspect of being alive right now is that so many things are being questioned. So many things are being reviewed. So many things are bringing new understandings. The research community is as fractured and sort of bifurcated as it's ever been. But also I have a really deep sort of sense of onus to trying to understand the sciences, the hard sciences. And there's this really interesting moment right now where I think science and what was otherwise in a kind of Arthur C. Clarke way considered to be sort of magic or mystical that there's actually a lot of credence being put behind a lot of that now. And the overlap between those things is a really exciting area, exciting time.
Yeah, it's neat to see things become, I don't want to say more like accepted, right? Like the academic community, the scientific community, like they have their focus, and some of the ideas that we explore on the show, can be labeled as a little fringe from time to
Sure.
time, right? But like, we wanted the platform to be like we explore all things that are mysterious and worthy of like poking, right? But I will say that like seeing sites like Göbekli Tepe and having that thing dated to when it is, right, like 12,000 years ago, has like shifted the thought process of that community quite a bit, right? Like you look back, years and years ago in the 90s when Dr. Schock goes over to Egypt to research the Sphinx because of John Anthony West's work. And when he like presented his findings, that dude was just blackballed and like so many like just mean and hateful things said about him as well. Like it's a lot of unnecessary stuff, right? And he just like persevered and keeps doing the thing. And they always point back to, well, if the Sphinx is really that old, there should be other things that are also that old, and where are those? And Göbekli Tepe was still buried at the time. And so now having that thing, I think it's like 5 or 6% of it at this point is excavated, but like having that be exposed and being, researched and studied, it definitely lends some credence there. And it's neat to see the community as a whole, like, well, maybe we do need to take a step back and kind of reevaluate what we thought to be true.
Sure. And I think like, specifically work like Shocks and others, I think one of the most interesting opportunities is to refine our sense of, it's not necessarily binary. This happened at this time or this happened at this time, as much as saying, one of, I think the most interesting things that Shock really exposed was just that water levels, different striations along, rock formations. It doesn't have to make the entire structure something definitively at a certain time, as much as saying, did this get built on another structure, on another site? Were there other architectural standards at play that were, from different time periods, different cultures? Are we inappropriately attributing certain architectural standards to one people or another? Are there linkages, are there cultural linkages between sites like you see at Göbekli Tepe and Egyptian sites or even Mayan sites?
Right.
Things that seem to be so disconnected before really starting to scratch at the idea of them being connected culturally, let alone, connected via some other means that we don't see at this point. And the fact that we are still, I think a lot of people in our generation have this sense that, everything's been discovered.
Right.
That all the ships have seen all the ports, it's really the ocean is the only place that we haven't fully discovered. Well, really, discovering sites like that in the 90s remind us that there's so much that we don't know still.
Right.
So it's really fascinating.
Having
time.
like the opinion that like everything is definitive, right? Like from a history standpoint, is super dangerous in my opinion. Right?
Especially when it's been revised so many times over the course of even just our lifetime.
Right.
And just the instrumentation is improving. I mean, just thinking about, with the Sphinx specifically, like prior to, the last half of the last century, like they didn't even LiDAR the surface underneath it. They didn't have the kind of instrumentation to be able to do those kind of depth studies. They didn't have the sort of dating practices that we, are constantly revising and renewing now. And so it's as exciting of a time for archaeology, for history, for science than it's ever been.
Right. Right. And I think it'd be neat to see, if, again, specifically to the Sphinx, getting access to that thing is no easy task, right? And there are definitely some gnarly theories and some interesting evidence that points to, things being not what they seem on the surface, and then below the Sphinx, like different cavities and whatnot that warrant exploration and investigation. And then, the Egyptian Antiquities gets a hold of that and they just shut it down, right? So it's like being, for us to get to the point where maybe we could explore something like that, like just as a species, is really exciting to me too. And I don't know if we'll see that or not, but like I think we're seeing a trend in the right direction almost, right?
And we're doing the most human thing, which is asking questions, digging deeper, looking further, and not necessarily stopping with the immediacy of what's been presented, but asking a few more questions. And I think one of the things that made me enjoy the podcast as a listener, and why I'm so excited to be a co-host, is that it just gives this opportunity to ask interesting questions to people who are themselves asking interesting questions of circumstances that are often left alone because of their complexity or because of, a particular community aligning behind what they consider to be truth in that instance. And I think just questions yield so many interesting opportunities.
Right. Yeah, it's an exciting time. There's a ton of research being done right now in all fields. There's a lot of really neat theories and evidence being presented. And so I think with this season specifically, we're going to be able to dig in and have some pretty gnarly conversations with some pretty heady people that know their stuff and do just that, right? Like just ask the questions. And I think giving them the opportunity and the platform to just share their work in a way that's super accessible is exactly the goal of the show. And I know you and I are aligned there. So that being said, like I know I tasked you with narrowing down the list of what you would want to explore in this season to 3 things.
Tough.
Yeah, like I think my list started at like 25 things, and I was just like, gotta, we like thin this down a lot of it. Not an easy thing. So
not an easy thing. There's just so much out there right now, and it seems like there's new stuff every day.
Like every day.
Yeah.
And depending on what pockets of the internet you frequent,
sure,
some more than others. So yeah, like let's just kind of round robin this thing, and like what theories or concepts or mysteries like are intriguing to you that you'd really like to have the opportunity to dig into this season if we can get a subject matter expert to hop on the horn with us. It would be interesting.
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest ones is really trying to look at how different occult groups sort of aligned their identity or aligned their practices behind the use of particular sacred sites or specific geographic regions or even artifacts in combination or in congress with a particular site. And I think there are so many instances, whether it's, different groups of people in, current society that are derivative of some of these occult groups that currently have, interesting control modes over our current, government or current society. I think some of that discussion can go into deep conspiracy theories. I'm less so interested in that and more so thinking about how do these practices help shape culture? How is it that Knights Templar or other early Christian groups or even other paganist groups, how did their practices and their beliefs end up manifesting in things that created our own building structures, our own architectural standards, let alone ancient sites that they tried to use to connect with something that's somewhat beyond us?
Right. So like when you look at some of these ancient sites, CK, do you think that like everybody looks at things through a different lens, right? And like the saying, I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't have it committed to memory, but like when you're looking for a thing with your blinders on, like you're pretty likely to find the thing, right?
When you're
like,
a hammer, everything's a nail.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a much better way to put it. So when you're looking at these sites, like, do you feel like there is meaning in the makeup? There are messages that these groups were trying to send, through their use of developing megalithic structures or high relief, low relief carvings, whatever. Like, is that something that you're looking at when you're checking out these sites?
I can't help but look at that, right? I mean, I think especially when you look at celestial phenomena or temporally relevant celestial phenomena that were happening at the time of the construction of these megalithic structures, it seems really, at the very least, counterintuitive that those celestial mechanics were not considered, right? And I think, often I think about that analogy where people are, they're talking about how somebody goes up to this thing and they feel it and it's got a little tufted brush on the end. Then another person goes up to it, they feel it, it's got this really long leathery trunk. And another one goes up to it and they feel it and it's got these weird ivory pokey things on it. And somebody else feels it and it's this like leathery leg. But they're all touching an elephant, right? And based on their experience, they're sort of assuming that it's going to have certain properties. And I think only now are we really able to, through the work of a lot of cosmologists, people who are super, super serious about their science, and just the nature of our universe itself from a physics perspective, from a cosmology perspective, being able to use those tools to say, no, actually, these ancient peoples really understood exactly where the precession of that particular zodiac element was at that time, and that's not coincidental. Seeing that, structures like Göbekli Tepe, the fact that it's the world's first north-south perfectly aligned structure
that we know of.
Right. So far. Yeah. And it can't be, when something's aligned that seriously. I mean, seeing similarly, like some of the stuff that Graham Hancock talks about with the pyramidal alignment in Giza along the Cygnus constellation, for instance, and like polar attributes of those sites. Those are things that are too primordial, too difficult for us for many, many generations to study for it to be coincidental, right? Without instrumentation, without, deep understanding of the polar shifting of our planet, using true north as opposed to using magnetic north.
Right.
Those are really sophisticated things. And I think there's so many interesting elements to unpack as we start to understand glyphs a little bit more. We start to understand, the Sumerian language alone, like things that we consider to be our own ancient origins, really lending themselves to very modern sensibility about the science of the site.
Right. Well, and I mean, the alignment being as perfect as it is, that's one thing. And if it was like one or two sites around the globe, you could possibly attribute that to coincidence, right? But like you go back to the pyramids again, and it's not just their alignment, right? But like look at how they're built, the shape, the size, all the things, the math behind it, the direct connection to like precession. Like there's too many things in that equation for it to be coincidental, right?
Pascal's triangle is the construction elements of it, like looking at were you to, take the scale of it and actually make it the same size as the diameter of the Earth, that the height of the Great Pyramid of Giza is actually also an appropriate representation of the scaled radius of the Earth.
Right.
Like things like that, volumetric measurements that would have been impossible to measure at the time and yet are so precisely known, I think at least give me just a little excitement that there's something else there, and it doesn't have to be aliens. It doesn't have to be crystals. It doesn't have to be, I think everybody wants, to your point, everybody wants there to be some answer that makes their own narrative make sense.
Right.
But I think part of the fun of this show is that we don't have a particular agenda here. Our only point is to explore, and is to continue to kind of, even with people with whom we have no real agreement personally, why not explore their theories? Like, why not dig deeper? And so often I get my, mind blown by people who have just asked one more question or considered one more thing. And the math aspect of this and the physics aspect of this that I was talking about a moment ago, I think are going to continue to be things that give you moments of pause, moments of surprise. And hopefully for the listeners, the podcast, the community that you've built, like really are so excited that it's a two-way street, that there's so many people out there that are also looking at these things, and it's cool to engage with your community in that way.
Right. And that's the thing that we'll come back full circle on at the end of this episode, where we're going to talk about different ways for you guys to get more involved, right? Like, again, we want this to be insanely accessible. And so we'll put a pin in that and circle back. So, okay. So you have the different occult groups. There's one thing that you really want to poke into. What else? What else is like drawing you into this to like get you excited to potentially talk to some of these researchers and authors?
I think one of the other aspects of this is the nature of forgotten humanity, that we have potentially an entirely different, Graham Hancock refers to it as kind of the antediluvian humanity, and whether it's a catch-all term like Atlantis or some kind of sense of an ancient self that we have essentially departed from or forgotten our connection to. And I think there's something really motivational, just as a person with my own limited capabilities, my own limited experience. I think about ways that I've unlocked different, powers in my own life simply by learning something or doing something. And just the idea that practice unlocks part of you that was otherwise latent and wouldn't be. It is not that difficult for me as a student of history to think that every new thing that I understand makes me see my own context as a human a little bit differently. And so I'm excited to dig in on some of the well, what have we lost? You know, I mean, it's like, it's a little cliche insofar as your show is Lost Origins, but I think just in general, there's so much breadth, not just depth in terms of who were we, and not just who were we in the last 10,000 years of our sensibility of who modern Homo sapiens are, but who could we have been, maybe as a different version of what we see as human.
Right.
It's really interesting.
And there's a lot of references to like all this knowledge, right? Like the Hall of Records and different things like that.
Library of Alexandria getting tossed.
Right. And so like with that thing going up in flames, like, is it possible that that's why we have forgotten, right? Like
or the, PP2 epigenetics in our neurochemistry, like
that's what like you start to forget, right? Because
that we specifically have to, the fact that our brain architecture has been, constructed in a way that lets us both abstract in great, like fantastic depth while we're dreaming. But it's really important that when you wake up, that you're not moving those dream memories from your hippocampus to your cortex, because that's not a like real memory, right?
Yeah, I don't need that hanging out in there.
I don't need that crazy dream I had, like, making me have different expectations for my waking life. And so even our neurochemistry, even the way that we as people have developed the ability to really compartmentalize our abstractions of our own memories is a really interesting, just neurochemical architecture of what our experience feels like over time.
Yeah.
And I think insofar as that plays into certain historic themes, is going to be a really fun thing for us to pull out.
I think so too. I think it'd be really cool. So is that like the big one for you? Do you have any more that you're like really excited about? Or
I think probably the other big one is just trying to understand how, or at least one of my biggest personal impetus for digging into stuff is trying to understand what is the difference between hard science and magic. Okay. That I am fascinated by our cultural propensity to call something fantastic or call something magic until we understand the underlying science. And so, throughout the course of this season, I'm going to be looking for opportunities to try to really create a union between what are the furthest reaches of hard science now and the potential lending of those science credentials or of some of the greatest minds in science to an application of not just human origins, but just kind of the celestial mechanics of some of the discussions that we're going to be having.
Awesome.
So I think that as a broad theme will probably pop up throughout the course.
I think so too, right? And I think with you and I being so like open to having conversations that maybe wouldn't have happened in season one, right? Like being excited to explore different pockets of the mysteries out there. I think we'll definitely run into some pretty cool stuff.
And I know you've spent so much time with all of these different topics, and you've really helped me dig in deeper. But what are you most excited about this season to kind of take further or move into that you haven't?
So for me, I feel like almost every episode kind of ladders up into this like overarching theme where it's like, how does this all play into, the grand scheme of things? And so for me, it's just like you said, the antediluvian world, right? Like I really am of the opinion that we come from a much older, like mother culture, essentially, that we've forgotten. We don't know very much about them. We're only starting to like uncover like evidence of them, but then also starting to make connections across the globe, almost like Charlie Day in the mailroom with the yarn and where does the mail go, right? Like that's kind of how I feel, right? Like when you look at sites in Peru or in Mexico or in Africa or in Turkey, and like you're seeing all of these common denominators. Again, it goes back to what I said before. Like if it's one thing or two things, okay, coincidence could be a thing here. But when it's just like every damn time, it's the same damn thing. Like, okay, there's got to be something bigger at play here. And for us to not be willing to poke that bear is really dangerous, in my opinion. And it's just like almost egotistical, right? Like to think that we are at the zenith of human achievement and that we are the smartest and most advanced that we've ever been. Like, we don't know. We have no idea what happened 5, 10,000. I mean, hell, half the time I don't even know what happened like last week. Like I struggle to lock
checking my Google Calendar. Yeah. Oh yeah, that actually happened, I guess.
Yeah. Right. So yeah, for me, the biggest one is like really looking at these authors and researchers' work and having these conversations, and then in my mind making those mental maps of, okay, how could this potentially, like, what does this mean for the existence of that mother culture almost, right? Because again, I think that the more we know about where we came from, the better equipped we are to control where we're going, right? You can't turn on the news. I don't really do that, but like Facebook, for example, like you can't look at what's going on in our society and not like very quickly realize it's coming off the rails and it's crazy and like it's wild out there. And it's going to take a lot of work to fix it. But again, if history is cyclical, or we can learn from our mistakes or the mistakes of our ancestors, or however we want to approach that, the more equipped we are to like right the ship. Like I think that's just a win for us as a species, right? So I think that's the biggest one for me. The second one, and again, this list was really hard to like lean out. Baalbek, dude.
Sick.
I can't like not go back to that every single time, and that's changed over time, right? If you would have asked me like, what's the one site that you want to go see or you want to dig into, and back when I was doing the show last season, Göbekli Tepe, right? Every single time, 100% kill rate. Like that place just boggles my mind. But the more time I spend just like looking at and reading about and like just chewing up anything I can get my hands on with respect to Baalbek, like that site is gnarly.
The math in that site,
Right.
And just like the 54 columns, and specifically having it, and Graham Hancock talks about this, a decent amount with it as a division of the precession mechanics of 72 being, it's 72 years for one move through an element of the precession, for 1 degree through the precession, plus 36, which is a half a precession, get to 108. And then when you divide 108, you get the 54 columns as a, showing a 1.5 revolution through the precession. Like things like that, clearly not coincidental, clearly very structured, but thinking about bringing stones of the size that they found, not just in the temple itself, but potentially as a precursor structure that absolutely was built upon afterwards, that the Romans probably realized it was significant. I mean, there's a lot more there.
Yeah, there really is. And I love the exchanges that you see with like different researchers of that site going to talk to, different like contracting and building experts out there, and straight up asking them like, how would you approach this? And those dudes are just like, you can't.
They're like, there are 3 cranes on Earth that could move that thing now.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's insane to think about, like, not only how do you like quarry something like that and like the precision in which the lines are,
can't even put a piece of paper between a lot of the stones.
Right. But then on top of that, like, how do you, okay, you got it the shape you want it to be. Now what?
Yeah.
Right? Like,
sick.
It's insane to me. So I'd have to say Baalbek, like if we get the opportunity to dig into some Baalbek research and theories with a subject matter expert, that'd be a good day for me. And then the last one is one that is kind of a lesser known theory. It's one that over the course of the last, I want to say like 2.5 years, I've really been going down this rabbit hole. And it's one that I really want us to explore in the show, is the theory that the Ark of the Covenant, right? And there's tons of theories out there about where it is, right? And like
some people say Ethiopia,
right?
Ethiopia. Some people say Church of the Holy Sepulchre, but others,
specifically a researcher by the name of J.P. Noel, has done tons of research that basically say that the Knights Templar and the Knights of Malta brought it over to the Americas, and then they traveled south through North America and basically ended up down in St. Croix in the Caribbean. And that's where that thing's hanging out now. So, and there's some really interesting like back and forth that like is kind of wrapped in, or that theory is wrapped in, I suppose, as far as like when JP was doing all this research, like some interesting threats, hitting his inbox and some phone calls that he was receiving. And when Lauren is one of the producers of our show, when her and I were really digging into this theory, like 2.5 years ago, we couldn't find a physical copy of the book anywhere, right? And we were like digging through the internet. We were trying to find like any way to get our hands on the book. Couldn't find a digital copy. Just it was gone. Um, and we did find a copy in a library in Germany. It's in German. I don't speak any of that, but like we would have figured it out, right? Like we would have got it translated. It would have been fine.
Fine.
Yeah.
Totally fine. Basically, it's the same.
Yeah. They weren't willing to share it with us either, right? There's for me, it's like it's not only a really interesting concept that you have Templar and Knights of Malta working to take this artifact out of the old world, bring it into the new world for protection. Likely in a time period that like well predates Columbus, which anything in that space I'm all about. Like that, I really like that stuff. But just that the mystery wrapped around his research and insofar as like the red tape, right?
And an artifact of that significance,
Right.
transcultural significance, like thinking about a box that may potentially contain the original 10 Commandments
Right.
is like there's something that so much faith on the planet imbues each of those artifacts with such significance.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's in one location or another, the fact that governments are involved, the fact that there are other power structures that, are themselves gatekeepers to some of these things, it can't help but be intrigued by what else is going on with it. Right. And the fact that the Knights Templar were stewards of this, what at the time was the same thing considered to be technology,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, but why protect something if it's not that significant? Even if it's just significant from a faith and cultural perspective,
Right.
still so cool.
I think like the hardest thing for me though, dude, would be, growing up the way I did and, being subjected to the content that I was, like if I was ever in a scenario where I was in the same room as the Ark, I wouldn't be able to open it and keep my eyes open because I would be afraid of my
Because you
face
watch Temple
melting.
of Doom. Can't mess with it. Yeah, just seeing those, just knowing what happened to all those Nazis.
Right.
It's out of control.
Right.
And I think when I consider this kind of artifact, it also brings up this other kind of macro issue that I think is really interesting,
Mm-hmm.
that I believe we will probably explore pretty naturally, because it really is a thread throughout so many of these different historical references, is just the idea of duality, right? The idea that there is good in our universe, there is evil in our universe. And so many sort of transcultural references to this force manifests in this figure. This force manifests in this artifact or in this object in this place at this time. And that these dualist structures start to create mythos that is really, to this day, culturally definitive, right? And even the idea of like, Indiana Jones movies and stuff, like just the idea that this group of people definitively are evil and they're trying to use this thing for these evil means.
Right.
And then all the way back to just other ancient civilizations personifying what is a pro-human or pro-celestial entity, and how those, whether it's mythos or actual entities, their interplay, how it affects culture, how it affects civilization, how it either built or destroys civilization at certain moments. So I think that duality, those dualist structures, are going to be really interesting, trope for us to continue investigating.
Yeah, I
as
think
well.
that'd be really neat. I really want to dig into that. And I also am excited to wrap our heads around the narrative that controls them.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like if you think about like the Anunnaki, for example, right? Like Enki and Enlil, right? Like it's almost like the inverse of what we're taught as it relates to modern Christianity.
Sure, where you have Enlil actually as this administrator of people,
Right.
the great Satam,
Right.
and you potentially have this other entity, and the idea of if something is pro-human as opposed to like trying to enslave us, like even that as a moralist context, where we're saying, okay, well, you enslaver, you order structural entity or person, you are against us, and just that we have this very anthrocentric sensibility about moral structures of the universe, versus thinking about and translating like you're talking about Anki as Osiris, right? And then Horus afterwards. You see this transmutation into the Egyptian culture that essentially deifies the idea of the person who's enslaving humanity, right? And I think those interplays are going to continue to have or help us ask questions about even just the nature of our perspective on good.
Right.
And because it is so anthrocentric, well, there are some people who would say actually humans, are the ones who are destroying planets and are destroying our planet, destroying, all this other life. And that as an apex predator, we commit these pretty deeply cosmically immoral acts all the time.
Right.
And so I think just even us thinking about different centric or putting other ideas or other things at the center of that moralist debate as we investigate some of these historical contexts will be an interesting arena for discussion.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. I think that'd be a pretty deep rabbit hole for us to jump down.
They'll pop up plenty of times.
So, and we want to know like what theories and concepts you guys want us to explore, right? That's one thing that CK and I have spent a ton of time talking about. Same with Lauren, who I mentioned earlier, who's the producer of our show. We really want to know the theories, the concepts, the mysteries, the ideas that are intriguing to you guys. And so make sure that you guys are coming to the website. You can hit us up there. You can connect with us on almost every single social media platform. We have a profile on those. Like, we want to know the stuff you guys want us to go after. CK and I are not afraid to ask the questions. Right? Like, that's.
And we're not here to agree with everything or tell anybody how to think, as much as we just want to pull the threads and we want to just dig deeper.
Yeah.
And we need inputs from all the different minds out there, because we can't possibly find it all ourselves.
Right.
So I think that's kind of exciting.
It's like crowdsourcing for our past.
Yeah, and bring the weird.
Yeah,
like we want to challenge ourselves. Just like that's part of why Andrew and I get along so well. Is I think we both push each other to kind of, hey, have you heard about this? What about this other thing? What do you think about this? Hey, I might be crazy, but. And so obviously there are plenty of people out there who whose contemporaries might refer to their ideas as crazy. Whatever, we want to hear it. We want to see it. We want to feel it.
Yeah, I think having these kinds of conversations, like, even at the end of the day, if it's something that we like can't fully subscribe to or we're skeptical about, like, at least we get to have these cool conversations that are on a different level and still interesting nonetheless, right? Like, and I think that's just the nature of the show and like why it had to come back, at least for me, right? Like, I really missed having these kinds of conversations with people and being able to connect with like these researchers and authors who have poured their life into finding these answers, and you get to pick their brains, and it's honestly one of the funnest things I've ever been a part of, right? So
when you're on the edge, you get to see so many other cool things that you simply can't see while you're in the mass of consensus and agreement and everybody more violently agreeing with each other's assessment of stuff.
Right. Yeah, I think that'll be a lot of fun. So one thing that we do want to let you guys know about is Inner Traditions, Bear & Company, the publishing company that we referred to or referenced at the beginning of the show. Again, they are Season 2's like primary sponsor. And I was speaking with them last week, and they were kind enough to hook us up with some copies of some books that we want to give away. So we're going to run a little like contest on social media. So if you guys share an episode of the podcast, or you share the website, or you share one of our social media profiles, just anything related to Lost Origins, and you tag us, you're automatically going to be entered to win a copy of one of these books. Okay, so over the course of the next 6 weeks, let's say, you guys just go nuts. You guys tag us on any platform that you can think of, and we will make sure that we're listening to all those tags, and then we'll build the list of who's been entered, and then we'll definitely announce the winners of that throughout, multiple episodes of the show. And I'd like it to be an ongoing thing, just to, again, get you guys more involved and more connected. So, yeah. And if you guys haven't, like, this one's kind of a shameless plug, I suppose, but rebuilt the website recently.
Looks sharp.
Thank you.
Real sharp.
Thank you. Had a lot of fun doing that. But was also having some conversations just with some supporters of the show that had talked about, like, you guys should have like merchandise or like t-shirts or just like a thing that I can like snag to support the show to help make sure, you guys can keep doing this, right? Because like all this crap sitting here on the table is not cheap. You know what I mean? It's
Indeed.
So was able to roll out a line of some t-shirts and stuff that look pretty cool. We recently did that rebrand, and so was able to build out a few different designs. So the sale of any piece of merchandise goes straight back into the show for us to be able to make sure that we have top-notch gear, top-notch quality, but then maybe also get access to some authors and researchers that we wouldn't be able to otherwise, right, because of how valuable their time is. So things like that. But then also we have a Patreon account now too. So if CK and I are having a conversation and you feel compelled to like buy us a cup of coffee or a beer or whatever, like hop into Patreon, do the thing.
We will take your quarter and we will buy that coffee and try to bring the fire to the next episode. But I will say, just as a part of that I know Andrew and Lauren and the rest of the team here have made a substantial investment in just trying to make sure that the audio quality is higher, that the just show in general is at a sort of more elevated level, and they're just going to keep kicking it up, season by season. And I think those kinds of things, the support from so many of the awesome listeners in the community, is the way that happens in general. That investment's gonna keep happening, and I think it'll just continue to elevate everything that we bring to the table here.
Yeah, and it's none of it's possible without the listeners, right? And that was I think the weirdest thing for me in season 1 was, I didn't start the podcast or I didn't start the website in hopes of it blowing up and becoming this thing, right? Like the podcast was a byproduct of the website, which that was just a thing that I just wanted to do, right? And to watch it grow like it did. And, I think it was like 4 years ago, I opened up the podcast app on the iPhone, and Lost Origins ranked, I think it was like 22nd in the world for the most downloaded podcast for like 3 months. It was like that. Clearly, there's people out there that want to know about this stuff, and just to be able to be a part of it is super humbling. And I'm really excited to be able to do the thing again.
Yeah,
right?
I think just in general, something I know you feel, and something that I'm sure so many listeners out there feel, is that there's a certain loneliness that is part of the human condition right now. And some of that has to do with like, oh, people don't believe the thing I think. People, maybe there's some alienation that happens when somebody has some sort of controversial theory or some sort of different approach to things. But I think more so than anything that this podcast and some others like it, people at Bear & Company, really remind all of us that you're not alone. We are not alone.
Right.
There are so many people out there who want to be involved in this discussion, who want to be involved as a broad coalition of thinkers and people who wonder. And it's so cool for us to kind of get back on the attack. And we're so excited for all the people who really loved it before to try to find other people in their lives who are also really, challenged by the status quo and want to keep pulling at those threads. And so just trying to continue to build community to remind all of us that, we are in this search together is so cool.
Yeah. And one of my favorite things is watching people that don't normally have an interest in this like space or these ideas or theories or even really have any like experience with it, find out that I did this show or whatever, and we have a personal connection. And they're like, okay, well, I'm gonna go check it out, right? And for them to go down the rabbit hole and then come back to me,
kind of giggly.
Yeah, like a week or 2 weeks later, they are a little giggly, right? But at the same time, they're like, I have to know all the things now. And like, oh my, it's just cool.
Give me a list of things I should watch or things I should read
Right. So just to be able to be like a resource like that, and make, like, I keep saying the word accessible today. And like, that's truly what I want this to be. It's just such an accessible format, whether you're a seasoned veteran in this space with all these gnarly ideas and you've done all the research and like, all the things and you can recite it by heart, or you're somebody that's just starting to explore this stuff and like dipping your toe, in this space. Like, I want it to be a thing that caters to both groups. Right. So, so speaking of that, the calendar's filling up pretty aggressively.
So many cool people.
It's going to be fun. Our next conversation, though, I'm really excited for. It was actually how we ended season 1. And this dude actually became a friend of mine, him and his wife. She was also on the show in a different episode. And, we just did a good job of staying in touch. And I cannot wait to have Scott Walter back on the show.
Smart guy.
Dude, that guy blows my mind. And, his show, America Unearthed, was very well done. 3 seasons in that run. and they're rebooting it right now. And so that's like the impetus for bringing him back on the show is for us to be able to like discover, walk through, just like ask all the questions about what he's going after now, right?
So cool.
Because that guy, like his background with the Kensington Runestone and the Hooked X, like there's all these different theories that are pretty insane. And with him being a geologist on the level that he is, like it's not fringe, right? Like it's not like the pseudoscience that a lot of the stuff gets attributed to. And every conversation I've ever had with the dude is just super intriguing. I'm really excited.
So articulate about so many things too.
For sure. And I'm really excited for you to be able to get on the horn and like pick his brain as well. I think you'll have a lot of fun with it. So that's going to be, I think, the primary focus of the episode is just, digging into his new work. What is the purpose of his new show? What questions is he trying to answer? So that's the next episode. We're going to be, working forward towards that within the next, I think, week, right? I think that's next week. And I can't wait for that one. And after that, we do have several others that are going to be pretty amazing. We've got some folks coming back from season 1. We've got some new faces coming to the table. We're going to be having some conversations that may or may not fit within like the normal theme of Lost Origins, but I'm excited for that too, right? Like to be able to explore some outside.
And getting feedback from the community, from the listeners as well, being like, hey, guys, that was a little off the reservation. Or like, hey, I don't know about this new CK guy. He's asking weird questions. Like those kinds of things. Like we want to hear from you guys throughout the course of the season. And, if we missed somebody that you think is so amazing and you just read something or you saw a researcher out there with whom you have this just great connection, please give us a shout. Like while Andrew has a pretty deep bench of people already trying to jump on the show and have discussions, we always look for new ideas and new interesting theories or things that we've missed. And also, don't be afraid to disagree with us or challenge us like that. That's what we're here for, is to try to ask questions, not to push away opportunities to learn. And
right. So, well said. So, dude, I'm super excited to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for letting me pop in here. Yeah. This is going to be a crazy ride.
This will be a lot of fun. We'll ask some gnarly questions. We'll have some conversations that are pretty mind-bending. And I can't wait to make it happen.
Exciting stuff.
Awesome. Okay.
Season 2,
baby. So, man, I haven't said this in like 3.5 years. Let's see if I still got it. So, I want you guys to make sure that you tune in next week for our conversation with Scott Walter. Until then, I'm your host, Andrew, and I challenge you to question everything.